Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, and we are coming to you again at 2 o'clock on Monday, and we're here from 2 o'clock to 3. And today we are proceeding a program called Satura's Black History Corner that comes on at 3:30, and they stay around to about 4 o'clock. So glad to have you with us, and hope you'll stay around for the program that will come after this program is over. I'm always glad to be here because we come together as a family to talk to you about some things that the family should be, in fact, hopefully sharing. And we will be talking about a couple of topics today. I want to start off with the topic I said I was going to start last week with, but we didn't get around to it. And that is the book by Stephen Oakes called With Malice Toward None, which was the speech that Abraham Lincoln gave in his second inaugural address on March the 4th, 1865. But we're going to talk about that first, but we're going to also talk about the firing of Lisa Durden from Essex College in New Jersey. And I'll be giving some different views on that, hopefully that will prick your interest. I do have some views on it that may be a little bit away from what has been said in the media.
Is that the one that was on exchange with Tucker Carlson?
On the Tucker Carlson show, and so I'll be sharing some ideas about that. And I know I'm not going to be very popular when I get through what I have to say about it, but I'm not here to be popular. I'm here to try to get it straight. And so, I mean, it's to be popular, smart, right? And I think you can be both. And one time I did see it when it was both. You were popular because you were smart, and then went off on a tangent and got into these little things we're doing right now that don't make any sense. Anyway, let me start with Stephen Oates' book, With Malice Toward None, because I am still contending, I'm going to continue to contend that the South was right. But I don't mean right in terms of its practice of slavery. Slavery is not what this war was about. You cannot contend that the war that was fought between 1861 and 1865 was a war over slavery. How do you contend that when there was slavery on both the northern side and on the southern side? And if you're fighting against slavery, you would then have the Emancipation Proclamation liberating the slaves, where Lincoln had the authority to do so. I'm not so sure that would be true. Even that would not be true based upon the constitutional mandates, because slavery is written into slavery without the word being mentioned is written into the Constitution. And so the slavery in both the northern states, I should say the Union states, and slavery in the southern states. And you can't claim that a war's that you're fighting a war to end slavery when in the midst of that war, first of all, when the war started, there's no declaration the war is about slavery. Then when the Emancipation Proclamation is issued 2 years into the war on January 1st, 1863, there's no mention of ending of the slavery in the 4 states that's inside the Union. The Emancipation Proclamation, which was not an emancipatory document, but a military document, was proclaiming the freedom of the slaves where Abraham Lincoln didn't have any control. Where he had control, nothing happened. And nothing happened, quite frankly, where he didn't have the control. Because how are you going to mandate the ending of something in a territorial space where in the space that you are declaring the freedom, you don't have any control over, and there are people that are in that space fighting you?
You know, the only place I think you got truly is free. You're really truly free is probably your own house, because that implies you're probably paying all your own bills. So until they're actually able to pay all their bills at every one of these universities and all then I'm fine. I could see them having their old blacks only meetings, but
yeah. I will get to that. The idea of that, the freedom. I'll get to that when we get to Lisa Durden's case, and I'll be talking about that in terms of the freedom of speech. But I won't leave it there. I'll add some other things into it as another ingredient of what this case is about, because we got to disaggregate a number of issues in what occurred in the firing of Lisa Durden, and I'll try to tie that together later on. But I want to talk a little bit about this issue, because I think we have to understand what the South was really trying to accomplish, and how we need to understand that given what's happening right now, because we have the same kind of issue today in terms of the federal overreach, which is what the South was really standing up against. And it is unfortunate that it's been labeled as a quote-unquote civil war, which that is also a misrepresentation of what this fight was about. This is not a civil war. This is not a war of the South trying to fight to share power within the same land space. It was the South that was in fact exercising its prerogative to object to the way the federal government is in fact operating as an all-encompassing force that was becoming tyrannical, and the response for it, first of all, was to object to it and try to intercede in the way in which it would in fact change the paradigmatic way in which the federal government was in fact carrying out its business. And if it failed to do that, then the ultimate thing then would be to withdraw from an association with it. And that had been something that had been ongoing in the discourse in the country from its very inception. In other words, there was never a time when there was a non-issue between the federal government's prerogatives and the prerogatives of the state. And that balance of power between the two, where there were certain enumerated powers that were accrued to the federal government, between that power acculturation between the federal government and the states, that strain, that prerogative to be exercised by the two arenas of power, ongoing and creating tension, was always there, because the fact is that when you give power to a central force, the centralization of power will lead to an attempt to expand upon the power that was accrued to it based upon the understandings at a certain point in time. It will always, in other words, power will always would always attempt to expand itself and not be restricted by any of the strictures that were put in place at the very beginning to do so. And you'll find that to be the case in the United States, and you'll find it to be the case around the world, where power tends to grow itself. And so from the very inception of the country, there was a problem with that in terms of what was mandated, what was enumerated, what was delegated, and then what was in fact to be taken as something beyond the delegation, something beyond the enumeration of powers, and it tends to want to expand itself into corridors where it does not belong. In other words, there's a problem between central power and state power, or the central authority and the authority of the states. And you see it, if you understand the Constitution, you see where they didn't feel, the states did not feel that they had sufficiently restrained the federal government in terms of the first 7 articles of the Constitution. So what they tried to do then in the amendment process, which would have occurred 3 years after the Constitution was amended, the idea was that you would add to the amended Constitution by having a Bill of Rights, the 10 amendments. And the 10th Amendment, which is not an afterthought but a forethought, and the 10th Amendment was the amendment of the Constitution to say that all of the powers that are not specifically delegated to the federal government, nor that is actually delegated to the federal government, but not precluded, powers not precluded by the Constitution to the states. Those powers, therefore, not delegated, but not denied to the states, will therefore remain, and I want to use the word remain here, remain to the states or to the people they're in. And the reason I say remain to the states is because I think what the scholars do not point out, or even if they understand this, is that the powers are being enumerated to the federal government. And the question then becomes, who are the enumerators? The enumerators are the states, and they are actually delegating from themselves, the states delegating from themselves the powers that the federal government would have. And they are saying here, the states now speaking, that these are the powers that we give of ourselves to the federal government so they can, in fact, act in a way which protects the states. As an umbrella of protection, the states are doing it out of their own self-interest. Has anybody said that before? Do people understand this?
You know, I grew up knowing that, and it seems like so many people now, and people who are, I would consider, they would consider themselves educated. See, when you bring that up, they just get this vacant look on their face. Like, and they almost look like they're basically, you're like kicking a puppy or something like that, you know, and you're questioning limiting, you're suggesting limiting the role of the federal government.
Yes.
They're just like, they're aghast or horrified, you know. That
I had a very good government teacher in high school, Mr. Vaughn. Bless his soul. He was an excellent teacher. He had government as your 12th grade class. You know, you exited out with an understanding of government. So the government was a senior selection. Everyone had to take government. And Mr. Vaughn was excellent in that. I don't think he actually, and in fact I know he didn't make it clear, in terms of, we say delegation of powers, which is found in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. But we don't talk about who is doing the delegating. I mean, if you're delegating powers, someone has to do the delegation. So if you take the delegation as the dictation of, it's really a dictation. The delegators then, the ones that are saying these are the powers then that accrue to the federal government, that's not the federal government that's doing that. It's not delegating the powers to itself. Because if that were the case, they would have delegated all the powers. I mean, the federal government, no power is going to restrain itself. And that's how you know even in that respect, the federal government is not delegating its own powers, because no power that is all encompassing is going to delegate powers away from itself. There's no power that the states have because it is given to them by the federal government, because the federal government has all the power. It's not going to delegate any of the power away from itself and give it to the states. That's not going to happen. And that's not what did happen. You go back and look at the Articles of Confederation, and you'll see that in the Articles of Confederation, they are so weak in the federal government because they fear central power. Why? Because they have fought central power for 7 years, from 1776 until 1783. They weren't able just to walk away from the British Empire. The British Empire had solidified its power and therefore its hold upon the states, and they weren't willing to have those states walk away and succeed without a fight. And after 7 years, when they saw that the resistance was not going to cease and they could not defeat this power from afar on the shores of the what would later on become the United States, but really the 13 original colonies, when they saw that this fight was not going to dissipate, and they didn't have the treasurer to continue to fight because they're fighting the French, and they had some other priorities that they had to contend with, and this was a distraction from those priorities. They made a peace pact. But after the peace pact was signed in Paris, called the Treaty of Paris in 1783, the framers had to then decide how they're going to particularize their own government at this point, and how they're going to handle the issue of power within the land space that they now own as a political polity of their own making. So what are they going to do with it, and what are the experiences they bring into it to argue among themselves of how they create this authority without it duplicating what they had just come out of fighting against the British in terms of its being overreaching. They didn't want to have that in what they created, so they wanted to do something different. And what they decided to do that was different was to have power dispersed on the horizontal level, that is to say, on the federal level, to have it in different compartments, departmentalize the power in the judiciary, the legislative branch, and in the executive branch, and you will in fact disperse it into 3 corridors of power in the federal government, and then also to have a dispersal of power in terms of what the federal government can do on the federal level, and then vertically what they do in terms of the state level. So it's a verticalization of power as well. I wonder if people can understand that. There's a horizontalization of power that's on the same level, and you then break it up into the 3 corridors on the horizontal plane, and then in the federal system, you will in fact have the power verticalized. You'll vertically separate power between the federal government and the states. But if you look at Article 1, Section 8, it's clear that the federal government is being dictated to. The question is, who's doing the dictation, and what are they dictating? What are they mandating? They're dictating to the federal government. The states are dictating to the federal government that these are the powers that we are willing to share. We're willing to place in your hands, but only after it was shown, by the way, that the Articles of Confederation would not work, because they had so weakened the federal government, they had so weakened the central government, that they recognized they are so weakened that it cannot do as a national body, it cannot do the work they need to do as an umbrella protection of each of the states. And they found that out in the Shays Rebellion in 1786. I mean, this was 3 years after this is after the Articles of Confederation had been put in place in 1781. Within, it was really within 5 years, wasn't it? Within 5 years, they had a rebellion in Massachusetts. I want you to watch Massachusetts in history, because every time there was a situation that came up, Massachusetts was in the forefront of it. They're in the forefront of the states' rights issue. They're in the forefront of the ratification issue of the Constitution, because that's where a lot of look at the fact that the second and the 6th president was from Massachusetts. The 1st, 3rd, 4th, and 5th presidents are from Virginia. And it's these 2 states here that are going to give this country its first 6 presidents. There were no presidents from any other states. So Massachusetts is primary in the deliberative process at the very beginning of this country's history, and so is Virginia. Washington's from Virginia, Jefferson's from Virginia, the 3rd president, James Monroe, the 4th president, Madison, the 4th president, James Monroe, the 5th president, with the exception of John Adams and John Quincy Adams, the first 6 presidents were from Virginia, with the 2 exceptions being John Adams and John Quincy Adams. John Adams in 1797, after being elected in 1796, and John Quincy Adams, who was elected in 1824, he took office in 1825, and would have been there as a one-term president because of some things happened there. Should have been president, quite frankly, and he should have been president in 1824, quite frankly, because there was a certain amount of some things went under the surface, undermining of the election of Andrew Jackson in 1824. He had the most popular votes, but then and no one had a majority of the electoral votes, and because of that, then it was thrown into the House of Representatives, and a deal was made, and they frustrated Andrew Jackson being president at that time. He will come back and become president in 1828, and then take office in 1829. But a long story short is just to be that there were certain things that were happening in the political landscape, and you see the formidable role being played by these 2 states. And you can't leave Massachusetts out of it, because Massachusetts is the first state that stood up on the idea that they need to have a stronger federal government because of the Shays Rebellion that had taken place in Massachusetts. But at the same time, in calling for a stronger federal government, it was the first state to stand up and speak to states' rights when it appeared to be to them that the federal government was getting too powerful and some of the decisions were being made and they were bypassing the states. See, you help create a monster, and therefore it's beholden to you to then cry out when that which you created begin acting askance of what was the containment, which was the restrictions placed upon it at the foundational moments of the country, where it restricted the federal government from doing certain things. I mean, these are the enumerated powers, and therefore the other powers that you are in fact taking onto yourself, those are not enumerated, and therefore those powers are not to be allowed based upon the fact that the itemization of power is strictly given in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. So anyway, to make a long story short, make a long story less long than it should have been is what I'm trying to say here, because the story is very long and it needs to be understood. So I'm challenging this notion that is out here, because we got the same problem right now with the federal government the South had, and with that states had. All states had this problem, because there's an overreach on the part of the federal government that needs to be restrained. It needs, first of all, be understood and then restrained if we understand what was intended by the framers. And the out for the states was that if the federal government became too overwhelming in its use of power, became too overpowering, what would happen with it was that the states could withdraw their support. Ultimately, that was a weapon. The federal government wants to maintain the states in place, because the more states that you have, the more power that the federal government has, just based on the numbers of people you send to it, and the amount of taxation that it gets, because there's a taxation upon the states, but not upon the people in the states, but upon the states, because there is a taxation that is based upon their affiliation inside of the federal government. You could put excise taxes and things of that sort, but you didn't have the right to an income tax, because of the wisdom of the framers who understood that would be the death knell, because then you have all this money coming into the federal government. What does the federal government do with the money? It begins to expand its power based upon that. And you want to restrict that by not having an income tax. I tell you another way you want to restrict it. You didn't want to have a central bank. That won't happen. You do see it popping up, but you see it also being crushed down. And when it popped up under Jackson had a fight and nailed it down in terms of the bill bank, because for the federal government to have its own bank, it was seen as a problem, and it is a problem. The central bank is a problem right now, and it's going to continue to be a problem. Much of the problems come from that. But they did not want to have a federal income tax, and they did not set up the provisions for a central bank. Although you've had it on the shores, but you don't have it institutionalized in policy until you had it. I mean, you had it in policy, but you don't have it in the genre. You have it now based upon what occurred in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Act, where you now have the central bank as a part of the federal government, which the federal government does control the central bank, although they're trying to act as if it's independent and they don't have any control over it. They do have control over it. They created it. It's created in the Federal Act, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, the same year in which they passed the 16th Amendment, the income tax, and also the 17th Amendment was passed in that year, which was another mistake, which was giving the federal government more power by changing the way we elect senators in this country. Senators were elected by the states. We don't elect them by the states anymore. We elect them through popular vote. And we do not understand that if you do that and you change the way in which we elect senators in this country, you don't have the then you have no other. You don't really have the rationale any longer and the reasoning to have 6 years of senators. If you're going to change the way we elect the senators, and you make it by popular vote as you do the members of the House of Representatives, then senators should only serve 2 years as well, which is what the number of years you have for the members of the House of Representatives. But they don't understand that, and so they want to change the way you elect them, but they don't change the number of years they serve. That's another contradiction we've got to look at, and if you change one, you have to change the other, is what I'm saying. Okay. I'm still dealing with this idea of Steve Oates' book, With Malice Toward None, because this is another way of hiding this whole notion of the Civil War. There is, in terms of shooting, where two sides are shooting each other with defined lines of demarcation between the two. We have not had that in this country. This is not a civil war. It's a war of Southern secession. And they are exercising their right to, in fact, object to the federal government overreach of its power, and since the objection is not being addressed, then they want to withdraw from the Union, which was a prerogative that was put in place by the states that have voluntarily come together to form the federal government out of its own, out of the total embodiment of his own power. It states that some of this power being accrued to the federal government, but only because the states needed greater protection on the part of the federal government. Isn't that true out there, you scholars? So they wanted to, in fact, create a stronger body over them, only because they saw by the weakening of the body that they had done through the Articles of Confederation, all of them under the umbrella did not have the protection because the federal government was unable to respond to what happened in Massachusetts in the Shades Rebellion of 1786. So in 1787, they want to fix that. And that's primarily what they're going to Philadelphia to do, to fix the weakness that the states had in the Articles of Confederation. It wasn't their charge to overthrow the Articles. That was done once they got there. And the framers saying that there were the 13 Articles, and there were 13 Articles, by the way, in the Articles of Confederation, and they saw it was so flawed that trying to amend it was not going to fix the problem. So they decided in their wisdom, I don't think it was conspiratorial, they just came to the conclusion, going through the document, that the amendment process of a flawed document was not going to fix the document. I guess what you could say in that respect as well is that you could say they amended the Articles out of existence, because by looking at it as a document, they actually what they actually did was to overhaul the document. And before you knew it, in that meeting they had from June 25th of 1787 until September the 17th, 1787, almost 4 months, that in meeting in that room, they were changing the document so that it could be a stronger document that would do the job the articles were not doing. And before you knew it, over a period of almost 4 months, the document had been so amended as to be transformed out of existence. Now they got a new document in place, and that document, because it is new, it has to be ratified. And that's what the framers now have to do. They have to now get the new document ratified, because they went there beyond their charge, and they actually overthrew the document in a sense. They put another document in its place. I think that is to be celebrated, quite frankly, because what they did by bringing a lot of wisdom to the table, and also having experience they had not only with King George III, but having experience in the aftermath of that. They had another experience, and now they now have that as well. They're adding that to this behemoth they had just gotten rid of with King George III, and they also saw that the weakening would not work of the central government. So the all-encompassing federal government and the weakening of the federal government, the central government, neither one of those ploys, worked. So now what do? Well, that was what they had to figure out. And that's what that almost 4-month process was about. How to get away from the issue of the central government, the central authority under King George III, and how to get away from weakening it so that it could not respond. How do you fix these two problems on both parts in the polarity on both sides of the political divide? Too strong and too weak. So what's the common ground in the center of those two? And how do you fix that? And they decided how you fix it is to create a stronger force, but to create specific weaknesses of the accumulation of power within the larger power base that you're giving to it through the delegation. You delegate more power, but then you fix the delegation of power to the point where it is in fact put in different corridors so that power checks on power. It's a brilliant design. And I see them action. See, you have to look at the document as a holistic document, not just in different sections of it. You have to look at it as a whole document in terms of the thematic aspect of the Constitution, in terms of what they were trying to fix. And I do contend that you see this brilliance in the Electoral College. It need not be fixed, need not be messed with, it need not be tampered with. It's absolutely brilliant in its design, because in terms of the idea of a majoritarian setup where majorities are to make the decision, but within a Republican form of government, so that you have to therefore, since the government is to be Republican, why is it Republican? It's Republican because each state brings in its own power. And therefore, in Article 4, Section 4, every state is guaranteed a Republican form of government. Why? Because the Republican, when they came in, they didn't want to lose that. They were Republican when they came in. They had their own power, and they're coming in with each state. See, they were United States. Each state is uniting as states. The United States. And they're coming in fact, they should have, the preamble would have read, if it had not been changed, it would have read, we, the states of the United States. That was the original reading of it. And then the change was, we, the people of the United States. But the original language was, we are the states of the United States. Each one, therefore, through that language, would have been claiming their own Republican aspect. Their own sovereignty, in other words, would be claimed. And that's why I would say in my writings about this that there are no Republicans in the nation's capital, and there are no Democrats in the nation's capital. You can forget that. They're neither Democrats nor are they Republican. They're despots. And this notion, you have Democrats, you have people in the Democratic Party, that's a name. And you have people in the Republican Party, that's another name. And they can call themselves, you can call them anything you want. You can call them the Bernie Sanders Party. You can call them Socialist Party. You can call them anything you want. But what they are is not necessarily what they name themselves as being. These are just names. The question is, what are the particulars behind the name, and what are they carrying out in the name of that which they claim they represent? It's a claim that's made. It doesn't necessarily mean the claim is true. These are despots that are willing. Once you start willing power, then that which is written on parchment, because there's a willing of power, if you're not watching, then you'll see them inching from underneath it to the point where the parchment no longer applies.
Well, they let's face it. I mean, and like what was his name? Joe Biden. He said the average person doesn't care about their rights. You know, and that's actually the quote. So I mean, they're basically saying we've taken our founding documents and wiped their bums with it.
Yeah.
And you're hilarious if you actually believe you can appeal to that.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying.
Yeah, John, that's a good point. And that's what they rely upon. They rely upon if they can give you some trinkets, you know, and if they give you some trinkets, they take your liberty away. And the trinkets are designed to take the trinkets away. You know, I heard that song by Margaret what's her name? Chapman? Tracy Chapman. When she was talking about, you know, give them candy. That it's a tremendous song where she's talking about, you know, you'll give them candy, it's about the kids, and because if you give them stuff, then if you do that, then the candy is it's like something that takes a man off of what you're doing. That's a distraction, what you're doing, and the reason for giving candy, because you distracted them with the candy in terms of what you're taking from them. You put this over there, and over here you're doing something different. And so they're very good about that. And these people know that as long as the government is looked at as being benevolent, they're not benevolent. These people are not giving anything of themselves. They're giving stuff that belongs to somebody else. Free stuff. What can anybody tell me? People say, well, the air is free. The air is not free. I went over there to fill my tires up. The air is not free. I paid 50 cents for that air. They charge you for air now. And so there's nothing free. Whenever somebody's offering you something free, you can believe this. It's not coming out of that person's pocket. They took it. They took it and then they dispensed it. It belonged to somebody else, and they gave it to somebody else. They gave it away. They gave somebody else's stuff away to someone else. And the person they gave it to, since it didn't belong to that person, he thinks it's free because it didn't come out of his pocket. But it didn't come out of the person who gave it to him pocket either. They stole it. These are despots. And that was what they were trying to contain and what they were trying to control. When they got out of control, they objected to it. And the objection got to the point where they decided that they could not restrain it, could not appeal to it, and therefore they picked up weapons after this decision was made, because they were not going to allow, the central government was not going to allow the states to leave without them putting force in place that maintain the status quo. So it's really a fight over the status quo, not a fight over slavery. It's a fight over maintaining the status quo. You can't tell me the war is a fight over slavery, and they're fighting over slavery when both sides had slavery. The idea is objectionable because it's nonsense.
The point we made in the last show is too. Grant had General Grant, the Union leader, the Union general, had 8 slaves brought to him through his marriage to his wife, and General Lee, who his family was well established in the South for generations, he himself, I don't think, ever owned a slave. We had to go back and change some of this history is what we got to do, John, because now what they're talking about makes any sense. You can't have a war fought and then find the reason for it after the fact. Let me tell you what the equivalent is of it today. Is these persons that have made a claim that there was Russian collusion, now they're looking for the evidence of it. If you notice that, right? Yeah. Well, no, I did read an account though about the connection to the Civil War. There was an account that I had of people's personal journal entries, and the guy it was in the book. I didn't go out to search it. It was a guy who's from Michigan, a Michigan regiment. And at first, when he initially started in the war, he was drafted. He did not want to go, and he had speak terribly about the blacks, and basically it's on. But as he got to the South and he saw the conditions that the slaves had lived in, he was more appalled. But I mean, he became more convinced that the abolitionist cause was correct. But he certainly was a gradual change. And then he actually didn't live throughout the war. He got killed, and just soon after that journal entry, within a month or so, he was gone. He was dead, killed in battle.
I resent this falsification of history because we lose sight of what the bigger issue was involved in this war. Slavery was dying out, by the way, in the world. It was universal practice all over the world. And Thomas Sowell does a good job of that in chapter 4 of his book. I'll let you go and find out what the book is called, but the chapter is called The Real Story of Slavery, which was a universal practice. It was practiced everywhere in the world. There's no time in history where slavery did not exist in the world, and it exists in the world right now in some parts of the world.
There's more people enslaved.
Not in the Western world, but
in Africa, there's more enslaved now going on right now than there ever was in the countries all over the world beforehand.
That's exactly
true. There's more
true.
going on right now.
That's exactly true. And I was in the place where the first castle was set up in Africa, where there was a slave castle set up in terms of the so-called European slave trade. It wasn't a European slave trade; it was an African slave trade. And the name is attached to it to Europe because only Europe is supposed to feel bad about it. But this is not a European slave trade because the slave trade would have preceded the colonialization of Africa by Europe. That's something people get to get in their mind also and wrap their mind around that the slave trade would have occurred between 1441 and 1831, if you want to date it well, really, in this country, it'd be 1441 to 1808, with the ending of the slave trade as a result of the slave trade could not be ended for 20 years after the ratification of the Constitution, so that in 1808 they passed a law to restrict the slave trade in this country based upon the Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution of the United States, where they were given a 20-year reprieve where nothing could happen with the slave trade until 20 years were up. So 1787, 20 years from that would be 1807. So 1808, they passed a law, and then that's when the slave trade was ended here officially in the United States. But in terms of slavery coming to an end, it began to happen in 1831 with the British, and then here it would have ended officially in 1865. In Brazil, the last of the Western states, it would have ended in 1888. But slavery never has ended anywhere in the world. There's always been a practice somewhere in the world. There's never been a time in the world when it did not exist. And we need to understand that. But I'm getting to this idea of Oates, because Oates is dishonest. You can't come after this war is over and go into Lincoln's second inaugural address, which is the one he gave on March the 4th, 1865, 1 month before Lincoln was assassinated, because the war would have ended April the 9th with the surrender of the greatest general this country has ever produced, which is Robert E. Lee. I'm sorry, that's just the history. That's just the fact. For him to be able to hold out with resources the South had, and to hold out, the South holding out for 4 years with the limited resource. This man was a military genius. We haven't produced anything like him since that time period. And anybody tearing down his monument, these people are ignoramuses. Lee is to be celebrated, and so is the South, when you understand what they really were doing here was objecting to the federal encroachment of power that had not been delegated to it at the constitutional founding moments of this country. And we need to look at that power being taken illegitimately even at this moment as well, because we've got to also think about how we're going to rein this genie back in, because the genie's out of the bottle. And that's what this fight was about. That's what's covered up in history. They can claim anything they want to. I'm talking about the real facts here, and so I want us to understand that. But I'm trying to be more holistic in our understanding of it, because I don't think we understand the true history of this country, and a lot of it has to be changed because they put a false history, a false narrative in its place. So this idea we have right now, as a matter of fact, when we talk about false news, well, news, first of all, is news before it's history, isn't it? So this is the making of false history in the future. We got false news.
You know,
Fake news.
The only ancient people that I can actually recall that had this clarity and this candor and this kind of this ability to actually report themselves even on favorable light were the Jews and their recordings of the old, you know, they talked about the failings and shortcomings of their leadership. The other ones kind of just glossed over or basically made it. They never made it where there's the king. What the Jews never did, made it where the king had to be worshipped and stuff like that. Whereas other empires made it basically the king or the emperor was their god. So you never had that going on with the Jews. So that kind of itself shows that, you know, there's always been an element of overlooking real glaring facts, you know, in the accounts.
Yeah.
And other cultures, and we've all done that. We have a mythos about America. We do. I mean, as much as I'm a conservative, I can see through a lot of the smoke screen, you know. Yeah. But that's one thing you got to see through is, you know, we weren't always this light shining on a hill. We did horrific things, but I don't want any other culture did. And everything is, as soon as we got to a point, we addressed that. Other cultures never did that.
Yes, John. Another point. That's a very good point too. Another point along the same lines is this notion we have of you know, how we say that you know, victors write history. That's certainly the history that you're going to read in the victors' institutions. But politicians really are the ones that validate the history as written. And history is written so as to be validated by the rulers, because they're going to mandate. You think that you can go into Kim Jong-un's Korea, North Korea, and you're going to read that the three family members, Kim Song, then Kim Jong Il, and now Kim Jong Un. You only had three rulers of North Korea since its independence, since North Korea became a country. You've only had three rulers, all from the same family. It's the first communist dynasty it's the first dynasty in communism that you've had.
It was the first or second, because he came about the same time as Cuba. It developed about the same time. If you actually look at it, it became about the same.
To my family, though.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that's Cuba's going on too. I mean, now it's Raul Castro's got it after his brother Fidel died. So they're they were about the same era that they were set up.
Yeah, but John, but with Fidel Castro came up in the power in '59, and his that was 50 from 59. It's 50-some years, wasn't it? 50-some odd years in which Fidel was the leader.
Right, but I'm just basically what I was pointing out though. Basically, here's the thing: the system of government, the Marxists always say they want more of the people, and the people represent the proletariat have more say. Yet both of these things right here shows examples that basically it's not the real people who inherit that power. It's always these elites that proclaim who were never from that background.
Yeah. Now
proclaiming themselves to be the leaders, and now they've never relinquished control.
Yeah, but we're on the same page here, except without dating of it. 71 would be the time in which the founder of North Korea, the Kim Jong-song, he would have been the leader of North Korea up until 71. Then his son takes it over at that point, and then the leader we have now, I forget the year in which he would have taken over, but it's something like 2000 and I don't want to get the date wrong, but somewhere around 2011, somewhere around there, I believe it was, where he would have taken it over at that point. I'm saying that, yeah, there is a communist family dynasty in Cuba right now, but it does not precede the one in North Korea, which is the first communist dynasty.
Yeah, I'm correct. You're right. I forgot that. I thought maybe because my dad was in Korea. He was fighting for behalf of South Koreans and to keep North out of there and keep them from becoming communists. That's what they told him anyway.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was in the 50s that war was going on. But I thought maybe the family actually started gaining power right after in the North. They already had the power. They're like the puppet government installed
right.
by the Chinese. I forgot the timeline there.
Yeah, the timeline. You're right about the fact that there's a dynasty in terms of Fidel Castro passing the power down. Just took the country and gave it to his brother and Raul Castro, but that's at a later date. The first communist dynasty, we've had dynasty before, but the first communist dynasty is not even in terms of is not even in Russia, because Nicholas II, that was overthrown during the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. The communists would have come in 1917, and they're not setting up a dynastic family government at that point, because it's Lenin and there's some other folks and all of that. Never a family set up at that point. We don't see that until we see it being handed down here. I don't know who's going to succeed Kim Jong-un. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out in terms of how we're going to handle this problem we got, because that is creating a tremendous problem, and it's going to have to be. We can postpone it for only a period of time. At some point, we're going to have to deal with this dictatorial problem that's created, because when you have all the power, then you make these kinds of decisions that you don't have to worry about whether or not the other person will go along with, because they don't have anything to say about it, because there's no check and balances built into the process over there. But at some point, it's going to come to a head, and we're going to see how that plays out in sooner more so than later. I want to get back to the point here, and that the point is that you cannot say with malice toward none in terms of this change of history with Abraham Lincoln. I'm not an Abraham Lincoln fan because I understand Abraham Lincoln, and I would suggest people do some research, a little bit more research on this period of history, because we have been told these politicians have falsified the history, and I understand why they did that. They did it because it benefits the politicians. If you make Lincoln some great emancipator, then the politicians are benevolent, and there are no benevolent politicians. Politicians are not benevolent. Politicians operate from out of force. That's the nature of their business. The person that operates, don't give me the politician. Give me the man of trade. Give me the producer. And you can't claim that the politician's a producer, because the politician's a tiller. All politicians are a tiller. That's why you don't have any. The man of force is a tiller. Wherever you find him, you find a tiller in place there. So the idea that people are depending upon him. That's why I say in this debate they have going on right now about health care. They don't care anything about health care. They care about the power that health care gives them. If they were talking about reforming health care, they would talk about reforming out of the hands of the people that took it. They took health care from the American people. You only reform by giving it back to the person you took it from.
You notice I never talk about tort reform and a limitation of how much the trial lawyers can sue doctors for malpractice.
Yeah.
The reason why is the bulk of people in Congress and the Senate are lawyers, trial lawyers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. John, they're not going to reform anything. Because they reform it. If they do any reforms, they have to reform themselves out of that which they're not supposed to be into. They're not supposed to be in all these different areas here. 3/4 of the federal government needs to be reformed, because 3/4 of what it's doing, it has no right to be doing. There's no prerogatives for the federal government to be doing the things it's doing. Where's that found that they can take over the health care of the country with restricted powers, with enumerated powers? Okay, tell me where that's enumerated in Article 1, Section 8. It's not. And so with malice toward none, you can write these books, Stephen Oates, but you're doing misdirectional things there, because you're giving us what Lincoln said after in the aftermath of the war, which was coming to an end. They knew the war was this war was pretty much over what was going on at that point. So Lincoln knew that the fight had been taken out of the South, and he was now talking about with malice toward none. And you're saying that with 620,000 people on the battlefield laying out there dead, and you're going to say with malice toward none. What were you doing? Killing people without malice? What this to serve with love, now to war with love? Is that what this was about? I don't think so. And so the title of the book is Dishonest. Now let me say something, because we ran a little bit longer than I wanted to. Let me say something about this. I'll be writing about this when I get back home, about this professor that was fired, about her appearance on Tucker Carlson's show on June the 6th. You know, they suspended Lisa Durden on June the 8th. Now, there are a couple of issues involved here, one of which is that the media, the liberal media, which can't get anything right, have this headline that she was fired because she was defending the Black Lives Matter party. That's not true, it's not the defense of the Black Lives Matter party that she's fired for. It was the language that she used on the program in which she was defending it, which they felt the language was in fact untoward for a professor associated with the college. Now, that's another issue is raised. The college, there are two things I want to say here. The college was doing a misstep in terms of firing a professor for comments that were made away from the classroom. It's like what you say in that case there. You say that she was not speaking on behalf of the college, and they disavowed the comments. And I'm writing about this because I want to write about what blacks ought to do in this case here. I'm going to defend Lisa Durden's right to say what she said. At the same time, I disavow the racism of her comments. And that's you have to understand that the disaggregation of the issue. I'm gonna try to write about this in my column today, because people are confused. The right to say it, not in the classroom. She was in the classroom, and the college cannot fire her for having an exercise of speech. They're confused here. At the same time, I think we need to be balanced here in terms of if racism is wrong on the one corridor, it's wrong on the other corridor as well. And we have to be balanced here. I'm against white racism, I'm against black racism also, but I'm also not for speech being criticized, and people have to understand that. Okay, got to get out of here, John. We are running over time, and as always, I was a little too verbose. Okay, until next week, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.